There we go. So Daniel Murray is calling in all the way from Australia. So I got to meet him in person back in August, so about 4 or 5 months ago. So excited to have him. I'm going to read his intro, and if he wants to add anything to that, you're welcome to, Daniel. So Daniel helps frustrated people leaders unlock the true performance of their people by developing curious and empathic skills to harness the tough skills of leadership. His degree in mathematics and in background in corporate strategy provides Daniel with unique perspective, blending strategic thinking with empathy and emotional intelligence in practical and pragmatic ways. His clients rave about his ability to bring humor and fun to the challenges of people, leadership, and make complex neuroscientific concepts simple and practical to implement. As a professional speaker, trainer, coach, and consultant, Daniel is able to help clients harness their most powerful assets, their people, through leadership skills that work. So again, welcome, Daniel. Do you want to add anything to your intro that I may have missed?
No. Intros are always those funny things that when you hear someone else read it, you think, "Oh, who is this person?" And wow, who do they think they are? Which is terrible because, of course, I wrote the intro. But no, I think you did a great job. Yeah, work with lots of different organizations in lots of different industries, and always my focus is around people. So yeah, really excited to be with you and be beaming in from the future. It is the 1st of March here in Australia today.
That's right.
And you're stuck back in February, so I can give you a hint. March is good. It starts well, and it's coming for you soon.
Well, good to hear. Thank you for the the insight on that. I just want to go ahead and jump right in because as a leadership coach, that's something that I work with businesses every day, and I don't think there's a quick answer to it. So, looking at empathic leadership and leading with empathy, in your view, Daniel, how does empathic leadership directly impact the prevention and management of employee burnout in today's fast-paced work environment?
Yeah, I think it's a complex question in some ways because burnout is a personal experience. Burnout's not we can't sort of say, well, if this and this and this happen, then that will definitely lead to burnout. It's something that one situation will burn one person out, another person will actually thrive and do well. And so if you want to understand what drives burnout, you've got to understand what drives that individual and what are those pressures that are being put on them in certain ways. And I think thinking from my own experience, what drives a feeling of fear, what drives a feeling of uncertainty, what drives a feeling of lacking support or lacking that sense of hope for the future, that's a roller coaster that changes constantly throughout your life. And so, what
Mhm.
it requires from a leadership perspective is being in tune and understanding each person, really understanding what are the things that are creating a sense of uncertainty for them, what are the things that are creating frustrations or depleting them, or they're struggling with certain work they're doing. And so, empathic leadership, in my view, is understanding why people do what they do and understanding what drives people and why they uh, perform well or don't perform well, why they feel good or don't feel good. And so it's as a leader having those skills to be able to understand my people, understand what's going on for them, and really try and manage and support them through those roller coaster moments that everyone will have because we're all human. So it's a really important skill set based on that building of trust and understanding.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess looking at burnout specifically, there was a recent stat that was pushed out by Gallup, and it said burnout is costing the American economy $1.9 trillion. Is that something that can be fixed with like leadership training with that support that you mentioned, helping individuals with that fear, that uncertainty? Is that something that leadership training can be a possible fix for that?
Look, you can definitely support it. The reality is there is constant levels of change and transformation in every industry, and it won't ever stop. Technology, you only have to look back a small number of years and we're pre-iPhone. Then you've got the pandemic and the impact that that's had on workforce. And AI is rapidly changing the face of the work. And so when you have constant levels of change, people sort of mistakenly say that humans hate change. Humans don't hate change. We like it most of the time, particularly when we're in control of it. What we don't like is uncertainty. We don't like not knowing what might happen next. And we don't like the way that uncertainty creates a sense of lack of safety, for a better term. When we're not sure what's going to happen next, it creates this sort of anxiety and uncertainty, this anxiety response in our bodies and our brains. And what we need to be conscious of as leaders is what is causing anxiety for my people, and how can I look to resolve that sense of anxiety. And what you can't do as a leader is say nothing's going to change, everything's going to be perfect, and don't worry. I'm sure you've been in situations where leaders have said, "Oh, just don't worry, everything's going to be fine." We know that's not true, right? We've all we've all seen the horror movies where someone says everything's going to be fine, and it is not. It's not. Everything's fine. So what leaders need to do instead is say, "Look, I don't know how this is going to play out. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I can guarantee you I've got you back. I'm going to be here. I'm going to support you." You have to build that trusted relationship with your people, and you have to be honest about it. But you can say, "Look, I don't know how this will play out, but however it plays out, we're going to work through this together. We've got each other's back. Let's support each other." And so that leadership training around how do you build trust? How do you build a team culture? How do you build that relationship strength? That's really the linchpin there. You can't make sure that everything's going to be fine, but you can make sure that you'll show up and they trust you're going to be there for them. And that's the critical role of leadership.
Exactly. Yeah, that's great. And I think you mentioned it with your response about how as humans, our goal is to like protect ourselves and make sure that that we're okay, our body is safe. And so anything that challenges that is going to come out as like anxiety, as that fear, and because our body's responding to that external stimuli and saying, what's going to happen next. And so I think, yeah, I think you have made a good point about how that leader, that's their job, that's what they need to do is to create that sense of safety and security to help alleviate maybe some of those negative responses that we're seeing in the workplace.
Yeah, and Josh, one of the things that often I find is in today's world, we talk about anxiety with a very negative connotation to it, and anxiety itself is a very natural response for a human to have when under stress. So in a stressful situation, I'm getting chased by a bear, right? The anxiety response is there to focus our attention, to shut out externalities, to increase our response rate to very specific stimuli, and to try and protect ourselves. The problem in modern day and what drives a lot of burnout is we put people into prolonged states of anxiety. Now, getting away from the bear, you weren't meant to run for the next 10 years to get away from the bear. It was a momentary getaway. The anxiety response can reside or reduce, and then we can be back to our functioning normally. But that's not what we put people in today. We put people into states where there's high levels of uncertainty in their workplace, where they're sitting in those states of anxiety for weeks, if not months. And that's where the burnout starts to really, become an issue, because people are feeling this hyper focus. They're missing all of the externalities. They're not seeing the world around them, and they don't see how this is ever going to end. And as a leader, you've got to be very conscious of those anxiety responses. And it's not to say everyone needs to feel perfectly fine all the time. That's really not our goal. Our goal is to make sure that when we need to have that burst of focus, we've got the ability to do it, but then we can pull that back when we want people just to feel comfortable and safe on a regular basis.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. It's I think I'd like to change gears a little bit, bring it back to empathic leadership and
Sure.
sharing some examples of how empathic leadership has transformed organizational culture and led to business success.
Yeah, look, a really simple way, an example. I was working with an organization. They have a leadership team, senior leadership team, and they were going okay. They were doing fairly well. Then COVID hit, and what COVID did was it wasn't too damaging to their business from an operational perspective. They were in a good industry that sort of continued on, but what it did was it created more pressure on that leadership team. And the pressure on the leadership team meant that they needed to work more coordinatedly. They needed to understand what's going on in each other's divisions more, and that those relationships and that level of understanding and trust wasn't there. And so those cracks started to form. They become more rule oriented. Orientated. They became more focused on short term individual goals, and that leadership team started to really fracture and pull apart. And so what we're able to do is using these ideas around empathic leadership being about understanding each other, being curious about one another, building trusted relationships. We're able to sort of bring that group together to say, hey, look, no one wins here unless we all win. There is this division, marketing can't win unless sales are delivering after it.
And
Sales cannot win unless, products are actually up to scratch, and products are no good unless we've got operational people to manufacture them, deliver them, service them, whatever that might be. No one wins unless we all win. And so the ideas around empathic leadership are really around how do we build that culture that we're in this together, we understand each other, and we care about trying to understand each other more. We've got each other's backs, and we're going to have that sense of curiosity that's going to power us forward. We're going to keep asking questions and be really interested in each other's work. And so when you start to think about forming those cultural behaviors, it's really powerful to transform the way an organization works.
that's great. And I guess looking at how do leaders start implementing some of those things that you talked about, how do they start cultivating that empathy within themselves to start modeling that?
Yeah, look, the first step, I've built a process around empathy. As you mentioned at the start, I'm a mathematician, so processes work for me.
Yeah.
And when I designed this process around empathy, the first step is what we call being consciously curious. So, you mentioned there's burnout in employees and people the burnout can happen everywhere. CEOs can easily be burnout. It can happen all through an organization. So the first step around being consciously curious is having this recognition that I don't know everything. I have opinions about everything. I have ideas about everything. I have assumptions about every person that I meet, but I actually don't understand everyone as well as I think I do. And so being consciously curious is actually meeting with people from the perspective of, hey, I don't know, but I'm really interested in understanding more about you. Maybe sitting down with a colleague and saying, what's going on in your world? Like, I've got lots of problems, and unfortunately, we tend to meet people and either unload our problems or speak to them with the perspective of, how can I get something from you to help me? And we need to turn that around a little bit and start from the perspective of, look, I don't know what you do. Tell me more. I'm really curious and really interested. And it creates a bit of challenge because it requires discipline to take the time to be interested in other people.
Mhm.
But if I was to offer one small little, what could you do today? Just start more conversations by parking your stuff. Put your stuff aside. We'd probably call it something different over here. We'd be a bit more colloquial in Australia at times, but put your stuff aside and
Yeah.
just be interested, be in the conversation,
Yeah.
be present with the person. Um, yeah, a good friend of mine taught me a little trick. I've got a smartwatch, which makes me dumb, and it buzzes, and I look at it. and it steals my attention all the time.
Mhm.
I put your smartwatch on your bag, leave it at home, and when you meet with people, just be with that person.
Mhm. Yeah, that very much attentiveness and really just being aware of the surroundings, I think is awesome because that leads me into my next question about emotional intelligence. And so, what role does emotional intelligence play in empathic leadership, and how can leaders assess and improve their own emotional intelligence to better support their teams?
It's a really interesting space because there's a lot of talk about empathy and emotional intelligence, and one of the challenges in this area, if I was going to test how fast you are as a runner, I could get a stopwatch, get you to run, and I could get an accurate sort of set of measurements. But
Hmm.
if I was to ask you how empathic are you, the only reasonable methods we use at the moment, and it's largely in more of a clinical space, is we ask you a set of questions that you respond to. Now, if you've been in science in any capacity for any length of time, you know that self-reporting is usually a pretty terrible way of diagnosing something because we don't have great self-awareness.
Hmm.
Even the most self-aware people often have those moments where they realize that they're not as aware as they thought they were. And what I'd really recommend for people who want to build and cultivate this sort of sense of empathy is to work with someone like yourself, work with a coach, work with someone who sits outside and who can provide that different lens. The 360 surveys are a great tool because they provide that, that information, that feedback. And it's a really critical thing. I think the most important quality of empathic leaders, because of all of that, is humility. You've got to be humble enough to know that you don't know everything, that you're definitely not perfect. You're gonna mess up. And when you do, you're going to apologize, you're going to make better, you're going to do better in the future. But that humility to know that you don't know it all is probably one of those pieces of emotional intelligence that are just so vital.
Hmm.
That thirst for learning is important.
Yeah, yeah. It was interesting. The other day, I was listening to another podcast, and they were talking about emotional granularity and using um, our words to describe our emotions are so limited, yeah, on a daily
Mm.
basis. So I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm sad, but it's like there's so many other words out there we could use to describe it. And so the author, the presenter, was talking about how if we can get more granular with our emotional talk, we can address it more directly, the issue that we're having emotionally. And so I think that is very much what you were talking about, how is that self um, you know, putting your talking about how empathic you are and, measuring it yourself. It's like, yeah, I can see when someone's sad, but it's those are only, that one little piece that you're seeing on the
Mm.
outside. And so trying to understand that. And
And yeah, let me build on that a little bit because in my view, and the way I teach and practice in this space, empathy is understanding why people do what they do.
Mhm.
So if from my perspective, there is affective and somatic empathy, which is more of, do I feel what someone else is feeling? Can I understand the emotional content? And do I feel that and reflect that content? From a leadership perspective, and I'll be pretty direct on this. I don't want you to necessarily feel what someone else is feeling.
Mhm.
Right? If someone is anxious and uncertain and scared, you feeling the same way now means we have two people who are in that state. But as a leader, that might not be that helpful. What I'm more interested in is if you as a leader can understand why the person is feeling those way. Like, I might notice, or something looks off, and I don't necessarily know what type of off. Are they frustrated? Are they angry? Well, I can't tell. Maybe I'll get better at understanding that from a distance over time. But initially, I just want to say, well, hey, what's going on? Now I want to be really curious. I notice that something's up. I can make assumptions, right? But that's going to be dangerous. So let me just get close to this person and try and understand what's going on.
Mhm.
And they might have a whole range of frustrations that I don't agree with or feel. That's okay, but I need to understand what's driving them. That for me is the real sort of heart of this in terms of empathy. Why are they doing what they're doing? And how do I bring that information into this bigger context, this leadership challenge I've got, so that I can best use that information to make my next decisions and move forward?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, yeah, not using it as a window to just start just feeling what everybody else is feeling, but using it, taking a step back and using what emotional knowledge that we have to discern the situation and move forward, as best as possible with the information that we have. I like
Mm.
that. And that leads us with our last question. What are some common barriers to implementing empathic leadership that you've seen in workplaces?
Um, so I'll answer this in two ways. The most common excuses, I'm going to call it, I'll just be direct on this. The most common excuses I hear of people say, I don't have time, or I'm too busy driving performance. And we see these two barriers come up. Now, my experience, if you don't have time to understand what's going on with your people, um, you're probably going to create more work and busyness down the track. It's a bit like saying, I don't have enough time to plan this project, so we'll just get started and hope it all works out. Anyone who's worked in project world knows that that is about to fail. And if you don't have time to understand your people and get the best out of them, well, then they're not going to deliver their best work. You're going to get burnout. You're going to get infighting. You're going to break down trust. And when that starts to happen, you'll have a lot more challenges in getting the work done. The other piece there around, so to devote the time, because it's worth the investment of time to understand people. If you're going to spend as much money as we do on these human resources, then treat them like precious resources that you need to cultivate and support. I always say this: if you've got a fleet of motor vehicles, of trucks or cars or whatever, and some of them start blowing smoke and making screechy noises, no one would say, "Oh, just let's pretend it's not there and let's hope it all works itself out." Right? You go and fix it. Yet we've got whole offices of people who, in a human way, blowing smoke and making screechy noises, and we've got leaders sitting back going, "Well, I'll just close my door and hope that all works itself out." That's just madness, right? It's never going to happen. Get in there and help support them. The second piece around performance, again, links really closely, right? If you want to drive performance, then make sure your resources are functioning at their best. Um, I'm sure it's the same in the US. In Australia, we use this term FTE, full-time equivalents, to
Yeah.
talk about people. And if you work, a normal 9 to 5, 5 days a week, we give you a one. You're a one FTE. But in reality, no one's a one all the time. Sometimes we're all a 1.2, 1.3, 1.5, right? When we're really passionate, we're driving hard, our productivity soars, we're great. Sometimes we're a 0.2, 0.3, when things aren't going so well. And so if you think about just from a mathematical perspective, productivity of a team of 100 people, where the variation in performance can go from 200 to, 1,000, wouldn't you want to have some ability to manage that number? Wouldn't you want to be able to know predictably where along that productivity span that we're actually functioning now and where we'd need to be?
Mhm.
As a leader, I'd want to know, right? If the difference between a couple of $100 and a couple of $1,000 in performance, I'd want to know. And so managing and leading people is about understanding them so I can move along that curve and make sure I'm getting the best productivity and performance. And, if it was a leader, if you're too busy to do that, what are you busy doing? If you're too busy to try and drive productivity, well, what is this other stuff you're working on? Because in my view, and from the number, as a mathematician, from the numbers, that moving along that curve will often have the biggest impact on your bottom line and drive the best outcomes for your customers.
I love it. Daniel, I so appreciate your time today, and it's a lot of great information. And I do appreciate everyone who's jumped in and is watching live. If you're watching this later, yeah, I appreciate that as well. So Daniel has a lot of great stuff out there. He has a great book, so check that out. And yeah, got it as well. Daniel, what's the best way for people to contact you if they're interested in learning more about what you do?
Yeah, look, feel free to reach out. Easiest is just jump onto my website, danielmurray.au. As you mentioned earlier, based over here in beautiful Australia, but love to travel for work with clients, speak at events and conferences. And yeah, this year's really one we're focusing on growing and building into the US. And you know, it's quite a fascinating sort of space to be working in. And it's, a real pleasure to be able to speak with people like yourself, Josh, who do such great work.
Yeah,